Welcome to session number 41 of Old Testament Survey. We're just finishing up with the book of Isaiah. In the waiting room graphic, I said still more about the day of the Lord. The end of Isaiah 54 to 66 is a variety of details. It's a difficult passage to work through, whether in a commentary or in a sermon series or whatever, because Isaiah repeats and cycles through a series of themes. He's doing much the same basic idea over and over again. The day of the Lord the last days begin with the first coming of Christ, and the substitutionary atonement is chapter 53. By the time we get to chapter 54, we're looking at an expansion on that. And the next few chapters are going to be looking at the opportunity that the remnant of Israel has to expand the gospel message to the whole world. That's an important theme. It's the theme of the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. God said to Abraham, go and I'll bless you, I'll make your name great, I'll make you a great nation, and through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And as we develop that theme in the Old Testament, the theme is that the seed of the woman, going all the way back to Eve, coming through Abraham, is Jesus Christ, who will be born a man to die for the sins of the world in the place of sinful men. That's the vicarious or substitutionary atonement. And this same Jesus, this same Messiah, this same God-man will come again to usher in the end times. And that period of time is a time that we call the day of the Lord. In between the beginning of the last days with the first coming of Christ and the beginning of the day of the Lord is what we generally call the church age. But it's during this time that the remnant of Israel joins with born-again Gentiles to take the gospel to the uttermost parts of the earth. That's a phrase that's used in a lot of places. It's used in a variety with the four corners of the earth, the uttermost parts of the earth, to the ends of the earth, to the hardest to reach places. When Jesus gives a great commission to his disciples, the Acts version, the Acts 1:8 version of the Great Commission, it says, "You shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth." And the book of Acts is the story of that expansion of the church to the Jew first in Jerusalem, and then increasingly to the Gentile. Today, the vast majority of the church is non-Jewish. This expansion to all the nations and to all the parts of the earth. Some of us live in places that were very remote at the time of Christ. Donna and I live in the mountains of North Idaho. At the time of Christ, there was probably no one within 100 miles of where we live. Maybe somebody came wandering through chasing an elk, but there were no cities here, there was nothing here. This is quite literally the end of the earth. The Philippines was unknown. It was not even a twinkle in Magellan's eye back then. there were people living in the Philippines, but the idea of actually getting there with the gospel is something that wouldn't become even a dream for a millennium and a half after the time of Christ. Italy is one of the places that Paul got. The preaching of the gospel in Rome in the book of Acts was considered an emblem of the ends of the earth. If you get from Jerusalem all the way to far off, inaccessible Rome, that was a big trip. And yet even Paul spoke about wanting to go on to Spain. And there are traditions that Paul made it all the way to England, which I have doubts about, but he wanted to go further. There were still places to reach. And of course, today we know there are still unreached people groups, and lots of them. What makes places hard to reach, what makes a place an uttermost part, is the technical difficulty of getting the message there. And with the passage of time, the development of the scientific method and modern engineering, we are in a place in history when it is finally possible for the very first time in all of history to physically reach, as in travel, the uttermost parts of the earth. The last mile is now bridgeable by aircraft, electronically. Today, people in places that were still primitive 50 years ago have cell phone towers. It is possible to reach people in places that were previously utterly unreachable. Today we have the actual technological potential to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, which is predicted in Isaiah. It's predicted in much of the rest of the Old Testament, and of course in the New Testament. The book of Revelation tells us that during the terrible times of the tribulation, this gospel of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in the uttermost parts of the earth, and then will come the end. So this gospel message of ours is not something that's going to go out of style quickly. Our task, our calling in life is to share the gospel wherever we happen to be. And in doing that, we're going to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And that's our task. That's our calling in life. So let me see here. I should share this screen if I can. We'll get to Isaiah. Well, here we go.
And we're on chapter 53.
Chapter 54.
We didn't do 53.
I did 53.
Okay.
And we're now in chapter 54, 5, 6. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in these. Because there are two ways to preach this last quarter or so of Isaiah. The ideal way is to spend about 6 months and go verse by verse through everything. There's a lot of detail here, but there's also a lot of repetition. The other way of doing this part of Isaiah is to call attention to it. Just say, here it is. Have fun. That's what I'm going to have to do. Chapter 54 puts the emphasis on the blessing of the atonement for Israel. Chapter 54 is all about taking the gospel to Israel, how Israel responds to the gospel. Much of that hasn't happened yet. We do know that the original church, the earliest ancient church, was predominantly Jewish. But that groundswell didn't catch on historically. And we find the majority of the church today is, and always has been, Gentile. Nevertheless, there is a promise here of blessing for Israel in the end days, in the last days. That, I believe, is something we're still looking forward to. The opportunity for salvation in chapter 5 or chapter 55, come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. He who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligent to me and eat what is good. Delight yourselves in rich food. And it goes on. Verse 6, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, the unrighteous man his thoughts. So who is invited to hear the gospel? The unrighteous, everywhere. Who is, or what is the cost of the gospel? It's free. It's a gospel of grace. God is offering the good news of the atonement of Christ to anyone who will listen. Yeah. Chapter 56 continues this idea. It's a call to obedience to the Gentiles, to the Jew first, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths in verse 4. There aren't a lot of eunuchs anymore. Chapter 6, the proselytes, foreigners who join themselves to the Lord. And then we're in verse 7 of chapter 56. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The picture there is of this unified community of all the nations, every people group on the earth has the opportunity to come to Christ and to worship God together. The house, which is the house of prayer for all nations, is Messiah's temple, which will be built, apparently. We'll look in more detail at this in the book of Ezekiel. But this temple will be built in Jerusalem in the last days during the millennial kingdom. And so for the quote unquote 1,000 years, which will certainly be a long time, but I don't worry too much about the 1,000. But for this long period of messianic kingdom, there will be a temple in Jerusalem which will be open to the worship of peoples from all over the world, from everywhere. I was happy to see the peace agreements signed between some of the Gulf states, UAR, not the Emirates, UAE, and Bahrain, with Israel. What that means is that Israel can be a destination for air routes from Asia, from all over Asia. So now we can have a flight going from Manila to Oman, perhaps, or Bahrain, or the Emirates. Those flights already go from Emirates direct to Tel Aviv. People from Asia, which accounts for over 1/2 of the world's population, now have air access to Jerusalem. It's amazing. Who knew that could ever happen? that route will certainly still be open during the millennial kingdom. I do believe there will be airliners during the millennium. Don't ask me how I know that. Chapter 56, 57 is a call to the people of Israel who are listening to Isaiah's message in the time prior to the Babylonian captivity about the futility of idolatry. It's a call to repentance from idolatry. In chapters 58 through 66, we're going to see a continuation of the doctrine of God's glory for Israel. The day of the Lord is a time of judgment and blessing, specifically for Israel, but with overflow for the rest of the world. Chapter 58 is a kind of miniature Sermon on the Mount. It's a call to an ethical lifestyle, true worship. Chapter 59 is a call to ending oppression. Verses 17 through 21 are known as God's or Yahweh the Redeemer, the redemptive work of God. Put on righteousness as a breastplate and a helmet of salvation on his head. He put on the garments of vengeance for clothing, wrapped himself in zeal. This is, according to their deeds, so he will repay wrath to his adversaries. To the coastlands he will render repayment. And they shall fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, for he will come like a rushing stream, which the wind of the Lord drives. It's Messiah's coming. Verse 20, and a Redeemer will come to Zion, and those in Jacob will turn from transgression, declares the Lord. As for me, this is my covenant with them, says the Lord. My spirit that is upon you and my words that I've put in your mouth shall not depart out of your mouth, or out of the mouth of your offspring, or out of the mouth of your children's offspring, from this time forth and forevermore. So it's good news and bad news. There's tremendous judgment coming on Israel and on the world. But in the midst of that, in the classic pattern, God's grace is the exception to his wrath. The good news of the gospel is the exception to the bad news of God's judgment. In chapter 60, we see the picture of the millennial glory for Israel. Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. So in the midst of judgment, blessing. Nations shall come into your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. So here we have nations and kings. And they'll be coming from all over the earth. In chapter 2, then again in Micah, we're going to see the nations coming to Jerusalem to worship Messiah in Jerusalem. That happens during the millennial kingdom. But I suspect also on into the eternal state. Chapter 61 speaks of Messiah's ministry directly to Israel. And there are pictures of Messiah reigning in Jerusalem, restoring and marking out the land, doing specifics with the land of Israel itself. Chapter 62 is a picture still of Jerusalem during the kingdom time. Jerusalem will be the praise of all the earth. Chapter 63 is a kind of a scary chapter. This is a picture of the second coming itself. And it's a little out of order because the second coming has to happen prior to the millennial kingdom. Still, there are some famous passages here. Begin at verse 2. Oh, I love it all. Verse 2. Why is your apparel red and your garments like his who treads in a winepress? And the answer coming from Messiah, I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the peoples no one was with me. I trod them in my anger, I trampled them in my wrath. Their lifeblood spattered on my garments, for the day of vengeance was in my heart, and the year of redemption has come. Okay, that passage about treading the winepress is picked up in other places. We see that also in the book of Revelation. During the Civil War, the American hymn writer wrote a thing called the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which picks up this same idea. It's an image of tremendous and terrible supernatural judgment. But in the midst of that judgment, in the midst of vengeance, mercy, 63:7. I will recount the steadfast love of the Lord, the praises of the Lord, according to all that the Lord has granted us. God is good. Nevertheless, in verse 15, look down from heaven and see, from your holy mountain, from your holy habitation. Where are your zeal and your might? A little mercy would be nice here in the midst of zeal and might. Chapter 64 is a cry of the remnant looking forward to the coming of Messiah. 65 is a response of both judgment and mercy. And again, we see that. Chapter 66 compares the destinies of the wicked and the righteous, eternal glory versus eternal destruction. And it takes us all the way into the eternal state. A few things to see with this. I've got too many markings in my Bible. Do you ever do that? You've got so much stuff marked that it's hard to see what you're looking at. Let's just leave it at this. But look at verse 22, near the end of the book, end of chapter 66. For as the new heavens and the new earth that I make shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your offspring and your name remain. For from new moon to new moon, from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares the Lord. Okay, that's a fairly happy message. There's coming an eternal glory for all believers of every age, for the Jew and for the Gentile, for worshipers from every nation, in a new heaven and a new earth. One of the most important images of Isaiah is the creation image. And there are, biblically speaking, there are two great images that we see. There is a creation image. There is a destruction image. There is a wrath image. There is a grace image. And these things are contrasted. The creation image is a grace image. It's a glory image. It's a blessing image. The creation of the heavens and the earth was a creation for God's glory. It was a creation out of nothing. It was a creation to demonstrate his immense power. Sin happened as an exception to the glory of God, and was judged with wrath as an exception to the grace of God. The wrath becomes this universal thing that is not an exception, but as a response to the sinfulness of man. Wrath becomes this huge thing. Judgment becomes universal, and in the midst of it, God's new creation of a people for himself, beginning with Abraham, then the Jewish people, from there through the work of Messiah, the people of the church, to all the world, everyone who will listen, is a part of this spiritual new creation, a people formed by grace as an exception to the wrath and the judgment of God. At the end of time, the sinful world and the universe that it is a part of will be destroyed, cast away, and God will create a new heavens and a new earth as a place for the redeemed to live and to worship him, to glorify him forever and ever. And so there is an old creation, there is a spiritual creation, there is a new creation of heaven and earth. This one theme ties the whole book together. I like that. I find it helpful. Anyway, that's Isaiah. And Isaiah is a complex book. It lends itself to a lot of work. There's a lot we can learn from the book of Isaiah. Okay, last book in the pre-exilic prophets that I'm going to look at is Micah. Micah is famous for his note about Bethlehem, and it's just one verse in Micah 5:2. This is the church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. You can see a variety of bell towers and what looks like fortress walls around. And right down here in the middle is the actual entrance to the church. It looks like a little itsy bitsy door, and it is. It's deliberately blocked up to make it difficult for anybody to ride in there on a horse. The Muslims who were occupying the place at the time tried to make it difficult for the Crusaders to ride their horses in there. There's all kinds of funny stories with this. But anyway, that's Bethlehem. Micah is unique amongst the pre-exilic prophets in that he spoke to both the north and the south, to Samaria and Jerusalem, at about the same time that Isaiah was operating in Jerusalem, about the same time that Hosea was prophesying. It's very likely that Micah and Isaiah compared some notes. So there are some of the same passages found in both books. We know that Micah witnessed the invasions of the Assyrian army, and certainly was around for the invasion of Sennacherib that surrounded Jerusalem. He saw the destruction of the northern kingdom. So Micah is right in the middle of things. He's an important witness to all that's going on here. The author has a name that means who is like the Lord, and we actually don't know anything about him except what we find in the first verse of his little book. There are no reliable traditions outside of the Old Testament. We know that he was from a place called Moreshet, which is about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. This was a village that was taken by Sennacherib on his way up to the city of Lachish in 701 BC. The Lachish was a walled city and needed to be taken with a siege. This was a very famous thing with reliefs in Nineveh, the whole thing. Moreshet is a city that fell as Sennacherib was approaching Lachish. And famously, in a set of short letters called the Lachish letters, letters that are actually found in a gatehouse at Lachish that were never sent away. The watchman at Lachish reported seeing the watchfires from the surrounding towns go out. He mentions Moreshet has no watchfire today. So it was visible from Lachish. Micah lived out in the countryside. His background was common. He was neither nobility nor priestly. And apart from that, we know very little about him. The purpose of the book is the coming judgment of both kingdoms and their eventual deliverance by Messiah. He's one of the biblical prophets, so he's going to be talking about the day of the Lord, and the message is getting to be a repetitive trend in the Old Testament. There's going to be a time of great judgment, but in the midst of this time of great judgment, there will be great blessing. There are some specifics in Micah's story. In the first 3 chapters, there's the standard denunciation of Israel. We're going to find this in the minor prophets. Micah is just before Nahum and right after Jonah. So we did Jonah the other day. Now we're going to see Micah. And I only want to spend a few minutes in Micah before we go on to the later prophets, the prophets of Judah alone. Okay, the word of the Lord came to Micah of Moreshet in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So that's all we know. It starts out with the standard message. Hear you peoples, all of you, and pay attention, O earth, and all that is in it. For the Lord God, and let the Lord God be a witness against you, the Lord, from his holy temple. It sounds very much like Isaiah chapter 1. It's almost a repeat. But the words are somewhat different. It's a different order. It's a courtroom style of accusation, or what do they call it in when a court hands down it's an indictment against both Israel and Judah for the transgression of Jacob and for the sins of the house of Israel, verse 5. Jacob and Samaria and Judah and Jerusalem. I will make Samaria a heap, and I will uncover her foundations. Chapter 2, woe to those who devise wickedness. Chapter 3, rulers and prophets denounced. But by the time we get to chapter 4, we've got some very, very interesting stuff. This is the promise of the restoration of Israel through the work of the Messiah. It shall come to pass in the latter days, this is 4:1, that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. Now, the mountain of the house of the Lord is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And to be lifted up and be the highest of the mountains simply means that it will be the central place. It will be the most important destination on the earth. And all of the nations, many people shall flow to Jerusalem, to the house of the Lord. And they will say that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples and shall decide for strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Now, if you've got a good memory, you'll remember that Isaiah 2 is almost exactly the same message. As I say, Isaiah and Micah seem to have been working from the same playbook, and they're blowing a jazz riff on the same basic theme here. The rescue of Zion. Chapter 5, of course, is famous. Muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. When did that happen? Well, that was the first coming of Christ, and it speaks of his suffering. And then verse 21, or verse 2, sorry. But you, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. There's a bunch we can learn about the Messiah from that one verse. First, his coming forth is from ancient days. That is, the form of the Hebrew here suggests from eternity past. It has been God's intention that Messiah would come and reign over all the earth. And this is the fulfillment of an eternal plan. Messiah, therefore, is not merely human. He is the eternal King of creation. He is God himself. But also, he is to be born in Bethlehem. He's to come forth from Bethlehem Ephratah. Now, there are two Bethlehems, at least two Bethlehems. The word means house of bread. There's one in the north in Galilee that is probably not ever going to be very important. And some critics have said that's probably where Jesus was born, close to Nazareth. Micah makes it clear that the Bethlehem that it's supposed to be is Bethlehem Ephratah. And I won't go through the genealogies here, but that's the Bethlehem that's on the south side of Jerusalem, the Bethlehem to which Ruth and Naomi returned for Ruth to marry Boaz. This is the Bethlehem which sheltered flocks of sheep on the night of the Nativity. So yes, we do in fact have the right place. The Bethlehem that we've all heard of is the correct location, and Micah names the place 700 years before Messiah is actually born. That of course gives the critics no end of difficulty. And if you read the critical commentaries, you will see some of their many rather silly ideas of what that ought to mean. In chapter 6, we see Yahweh's case against Israel and the foretelling of destruction for the wicked. Chapter 7, just as we would expect in the prophets, the prediction of grace and mercy for Israel and for believers all over the earth. There is a prediction of the restoration of Judah in particular from captivity, a rebuilding of walls, rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem, a return to the land. But there is also this eschatological flavor, this last days flavor in the prophecy, looking forward to the coming of Messiah as king. Okay. Enough of that. Let us go on. I'm going to have to leave this particular thing, and I'm going to have to share a different one. Share, oops. Uh-oh. And uh-oh. I'm going to go out, and I have to make this disappear. I'm going to have to share. Oh, stop it. Share. There we go. Now I'll go to this one and see if I can make this work correctly. Nope. Got to stop the share. Like I say, just love the technology. It's so helpful. Okay, and share it again. And I have to, okay, that's not it. Okay, screen sharing has failed to happen. This is really handy. Now it's the wrong one again. You gotta love it. Okay. Okay, now it's the right one. Oh, sorry about that. Let's go on briefly to the little bitty book of Zephaniah. If you're in Micah still, just turn a few pages to the right. You'll find Habakkuk, and then you will find the little book of Zephaniah. And I stick to Zephaniah in this particular spot because this is about where he fits. Give or take just a little bit, this is where Zephaniah fits. And am I? No, I'm in the wrong place. I'm sorry. I don't think you, no, we should be in 2 Kings.
Right.
We should be in 2 Kings. Your notes are going to say 2 Kings.
Mm-hmm.
And Donna is over here wondering how I have managed to make such a hash of my technology.
I'm just praying for you. It's complex.
Yeah, poor Donna. She spends half her time praying that I will figure out the technology without any grandkids around. Okay, 2 Kings. I'd like to get to Zephaniah today, but I don't know that I'll get that far. Let's go to 2 Kings, and we begin at chapter 18 of 2 Kings. Chapters 18 through 25 of 2 Kings take us down the solitary kingdom of Judah, and it will follow us all the way down to the fall of the southern kingdom, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. The story is going to pick up in chapter 18 with the history of Hezekiah. This particular picture was taken, as you can probably imagine, a long time ago. The character in front is a friend of mine from way back named Mark Dobratz. Mark Dobratz is now somebody's grandpa, I'm sure. This shot was taken in 1985, and that's me in the back. I'm wearing my distinctive striped shirt, which I retired after that trip, which was very good at giving me a bumblebee-shaped tan when I was working out in the sunshine. The two of us are walking through a thing called Hezekiah's Tunnel in Jerusalem. You probably can't see, but we're about ankle deep in cold water. We're both carrying flashlights and trying to find our way through this tunnel. The tunnel was dug by King Hezekiah in preparation for the siege of Jerusalem by Sennacherib. So it dates to around 701 BC. It might be just a bit earlier than that, but that's about time. What makes it a very interesting structure is that it's over half a kilometer long. It's quite a long tunnel. It has an S-shaped curve to it. So it's not straight through. They didn't shine a laser light through it to get the level. The water runs ever so slightly downhill, not too fast and not too slow, just exactly the right slope from the Gihon Spring outside the gates of Jerusalem down to the Siloam Pool. And the Siloam Pool is still there today. It was a place that is made famous in the New Testament. This is where Jesus did some healings. And so it's a fairly important place. And that water is important to the survival of Jerusalem in times of siege. The confrontation with Sennacherib is one that we saw in the book of Isaiah. Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, surrounded the city, sent an emissary saying, it's time to give up. And Isaiah talked to Hezekiah. Hezekiah maintained his faith and resisted Sennacherib. The next morning, the army of the Assyrian king was all dead men. And that's recounted here again in I Kings 18 and on into chapter 19. Very much the same story, and a lot of the same details are included. In chapter 19, fall of Sennacherib. Chapter 20, we see that Hezekiah was ill, and he prayed for a restoration of health. We see the extra 15 years, the miraculous extension of life, together with the sign, the lengthening of the shadow by 10 steps happens the first part of chapter 20. The rest of chapter 20 recounts the meeting with the Babylonians. It's fascinating to me that the order of the Sennacherib siege and the Babylonian meeting with Merodach-Baladan are in the same order in II Kings as they are in Isaiah. I think that Isaiah and the author of II Kings probably knew each other. They almost certainly shared notes on this. Perhaps the historical episode here was originally written by Isaiah to be included later on in the chronicles of the history of Judah. I don't really know, but it seems to me that we're doing some of the same things. The kings who followed Hezekiah are generally evil, Manasseh and Ammon. Manasseh, of course, co-regent with Hezekiah, seems to have repented at the end of his life, but he lasted a long time, 55 years. Tradition has it that Manasseh is the king who was responsible for the assassination of Isaiah. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but that's the tradition. Ammon lasted only a couple of years, and he is noted as being not a good king. In chapter 22 and 3, we see the introduction of King Josiah. Now, Josiah was a good king, but he picked a bad time to reign. The picture there in the background, by the way, is a bar mitzvah on a Monday night at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And that great big thing that looks like a 55-gallon oil drum with decoration is a scroll of the Torah. It's quite heavy. It weighs probably 25 kilos. So it's a very heavy thing. The young man who is the son of the covenant, who will be reading from the Torah at this bar mitzvah, is the young man who's carrying that scroll right now, and he'll take it to the reading spot, and several of the men will help him to unroll it to the correct place, and he will read from the scroll of the book of the law. Very, very interesting thing. That book of the law is significant for Josiah's reign. For Josiah, loved the Lord. He began his reign at quite a young age with a co-regency. Here in verse 1 and 2, all the peoples, all the people, on the hearing of the book of the covenant that he had been found in the house of the Lord. So, no. Josiah 22:1. He was 8 years old, reigned 31 years. Mother's name was Jedidiah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, did not turn aside to the right or to the left. Probably the most important thing that Josiah did was an attempt to repair and to clean up the temple. We're told in verse 8 of chapter 22 that Hilkiah the high priest found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. Now that would be a scroll about the size of the thing that we see there in the background, if it was the entire scroll of the Torah. Some have argued that it was a smaller chunk, perhaps just the book of Deuteronomy, perhaps just a patch of the book of the Ten Commandments. I rather think it was an entire Torah scroll, but I could be wrong. I kind of like it. I like the idea of finding this big thing, and that it was missing for all the previous years, or for many of the previous years, at least since Hezekiah. Perhaps for a whole generation or 2 generations, no one has seen this scroll because the temple had not been used, it had not been cleaned out, it had not been remodeled, and so dirt and dust and who knows what, rats chewing things. So Hilkiah finds the book of the law. Now, tradition has it that most manuscripts of the Old Testament that were in existence at the time of Hezekiah in Jerusalem were destroyed by his son Manasseh. Again, tradition, where would we be without our tradition? It's entirely possible. We do know that very, very few fragments of anything prior to the 7th century BC has ever been found in Jerusalem. We found a few fragments, but very, very few. It would be nice, but we don't have them. We don't know exactly what it is, and it doesn't matter. The critics, of course, have taken this as an opportunity to invent a story. They would say that what Hilkiah actually brought to Josiah was the book of Deuteronomy. And Hilkiah didn't find it. He actually went out and wrote it. And so Hilkiah the priest, or some other priest who's not named, is responsible for inventing, among other things, monotheism and the Ten Commandments and most of Jewish law. I would say that that's a reach. There's nothing in the text that suggests that the book of the law means anything other than the books of Moses. There's no indication of any of that, or that the book of Deuteronomy didn't exist prior to this time. Deuteronomy actually predicts a lot of things which will happen later, but I think it fits within Moses' work. The language of Deuteronomy is identical to the language of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. It was obviously written by the same author, but that's the kind of thing that you'd have to actually be able to read Hebrew to see. I believe that the scholars who believe that Josiah had the book of Deuteronomy written in order to support his reform are just grasping at straws. So in chapter 23, we see a purging of idolatry, first in Judah and then on into Samaria, which is amazing. There is a reinstitution of the Passover that takes place here in chapter 23. And yet in 23 and verses 26 and 27, let's see if I can find that. We see that in spite of this spectacular revival that was going on in Israel, still the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. The Lord said, I will remove Judah out of my sight as I have removed Israel. Okay, the text does not say that the revival under Josiah was not real. I believe that it was. There are several of the kings or several of the prophets of Israel who seem to have cooperated with Josiah during his revivals. I think this was genuine, and I think there were large numbers of people who became believers and became servants of God. I think that we'll meet them in heaven, in fact. Josiah himself will be there, and he will tell you that it was not the book of Deuteronomy, it was the whole Pentateuch that was found. Nevertheless, the revival under Josiah was too late. I call it a revival too late because God had already determined that the sin of Israel was deserving of judgment. So the mechanisms had been put in place and were running in the history of the world to bring the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar to destroy Jerusalem. That was already underway. In, let's see. Yeah, the end of chapter 23, we see the death of Josiah, which is really too bad. He was killed and really didn't need to be. We're told that Pharaoh Necho of Egypt came up to join in a battle against the Assyrians. This would have been around 612 BC. And there was, in fact, what we sometimes call the first real worldwide war. So we talk about the First World War happening 100 years ago, but it actually didn't. It happened about 2,500 years ago. And the First World War involved Mesopotamian powers. It involved Asia Minor. There were northern powers involved. The Arabs were involved in this. Even Egypt tried to get in on this war. All of the great powers of the ancient world came together in an absolutely monumental conflict to try to destroy the Assyrian power. And this ended up with the destruction of the Assyrian army in 612, the destruction of the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in 609 BC. Necho was a minor king of what was by that time a very minor world power. Egypt had had its day in the sun 500 years before. With the death of Merneptah, Egypt never came back to great power. It did the occasional little local harassment, and it never quite went away, but it was never a great power again. Pharaoh Necho was a minor king. He had a minor army. Once it was clear that the Babylonians and the Elamites and some others of Mesopotamia were in fact going to defeat the Assyrians, Necho headed up the great international trade route to join in the fun. And it wasn't meant to be. Necho finally made it on up, but he got there too late and didn't get any part of the glory at all. Along the way, he bumped into Israel, and Josiah, rather than doing the smart thing, Israel is or Egypt is an enemy. Egypt was making a mistake. They were driving up the road to join a battle that they had no part in. What Josiah should have done was to let his enemy go ahead and make his mistake, and then he could run back home with his tail between his legs, and Josiah would have been fine. Instead, Josiah went out to battle, and in that battle, he died. It's a sad thing. We hated to lose Josiah, but he dies at the end of chapter 23. Pharaoh Necho went home after the battle and didn't get anything out of it either. The end of chapter 23 on into the end of the book, chapters 24 and 25, take us through the evil reigns of Josiah's sons. We have just a few of them: Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah are the four offspring of Josiah. Jehoiakim reigned for 11 years, and Zedekiah also reigned for 11 years. That will take us all the way down to 586 BC. The first deportation from Jerusalem happens in 606 BC. Nebuchadnezzar came and deported the nobility. When we get into the prophets, this will make some difference. In 606, the nobility went away. Later on, under Jehoiakim, who only reigned for 3 months, Nebuchadnezzar came again, 597, and deported the middle class, shopkeepers, professional people, the middle class of Jerusalem. Zedekiah then reigned from 597 until 586, at which point he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. And Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. We know that as the first destruction of Jerusalem. And the temple was destroyed at that time by the Babylonians. The people of Israel, all of the remaining population that was more or less movable, went off to Babylon to finish up a 70-year captivity. The 70 years go from 606 BC until 537 BC. So this is all known as the Babylonian captivity. Jehoiakim, who had reigned for a mere 3 months, didn't die in the destruction of Jerusalem. Rather, after a character named Gedaliah was made governor of the destroyed Jerusalem, Jehoiakim was taken to Babylon, and eventually he was elevated and became a fairly important character. This is the beginning of a long life of exile for the people of Israel in Babylon. After 70 years, a remnant will eventually return to Jerusalem. But the largest portion of Israel never came back. They stayed in Babylon and later in Persia, which became Iran, until relatively modern times. In 1948, when the modern state of Israel was declared by the United Nations, the Arab nations and the Muslim nations of the region expelled all of their Jews, including some 750,000 who were living in Mesopotamia at the time. And those people were forced out, and they became refugees. So there is, in fact, a gigantic number of refugees from that period. The largest numbers of them were Jews. Now, of course, there were Arabs who were also forced out by the Arab armies when Israel was invaded by those same Arab armies. Those people are still in refugee camps. The Jews who returned from Babylon, to a large extent, began new lives in modern Israel and became the foundation of the modern state of Israel. They were that first generation of enthusiastic patriots who fought the wars of modern Israel. Today, of course, they're all a part of history, but their offspring continue to be the men and women who make up modern Israel. Okay, that takes us to the end of II Kings. The two books of the Chronicles follow, and I'm not going to cover those. We're not going to lecture through the Chronicles. We're actually going to end with this little book of Zephaniah. Zephaniah's name is a bit of a problem. We're going to find Zephaniah by looking in the minor prophets toward the end of all of these little minor prophets: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, and then there's Habakkuk. Wow, is it ever hard to find anybody in the minor prophets quickly? Now we get to Zephaniah. Okay, the author's name is a problem. Maybe it means Yahweh has hidden. Could be, or it could mean watchman of Yahweh. We don't know. It's one of several problems. When we get to heaven, we'll look up Zephaniah and we can ask him, what does your name mean? I hope it doesn't embarrass him. He was a well-known preacher at the time of Josiah. And we see in an unusual passage that Zephaniah traces his lineage all the way back through 4 generations to King Hezekiah. Now, it might be the real King Hezekiah. It might just be somebody else by the name of Hezekiah. We don't have any evidence. It's just there it is. There's the name. So perhaps he's a great grandson of King Hezekiah. The date, probably during Josiah's reign, so shortly before the destruction of Nineveh, which is around 612 BC. The precise date is open to argument, but sometime before that, maybe around 625. Politically, Josiah was attempting the reform, but the apostasy was too great. So Zephaniah's message is a message of judgment primarily. The religious background is, of course, this picture of Josiah's attempted reform, and it just didn't work. We see also the same background in Jeremiah. I'll be going on to Jeremiah after Zephaniah. Jeremiah is looking at the same general background. The moral and religious fiber of Judah is frayed, it's broken. Josiah's reforms just didn't fix everything. There was an attempt, there was a re-centralization of worship in Jerusalem. The northern shrines were destroyed, particularly at Bethel, and perhaps that's why we can't find them anymore or any of their ruins. Nevertheless, it's difficult to say where Zephaniah fits into all of this reform. We know that he preached after the reforms, and so there was still a great deal of apostasy in Judah. I think that Zephaniah's work may have been part of the early reforming zeal. It was too little, though, and too late. Judah couldn't be salvaged. The message that we see in Zephaniah fits into this overall pattern of the day of the Lord. The theological message of Zephaniah is overwhelmingly the time of judgment in the day of the Lord. The phrase, the day of the Lord, or in that day, or in the day of God's wrath, or in the day of God's vengeance, is mentioned more in this little book than in any of the other books of the Old Testament. It is impossible to say that the focus of Zephaniah is anything except the day of the Lord. And he's really got it down. The expression is used more than all the others. It's the first half of the book, the first 2/3 of the book, down through chapter 3 and verse 8, is a message of doom for Judah and then doom for the surrounding nations. If you look at this, and I'm not going to take it apart, but we see the focus on Judah, first of all, and then the surrounding nations. Sometimes we say, and it's important to note, that the day of the Lord includes a universal component. But when the nations are actually named, they are the nations that immediately surround Israel. I can list them for you, beginning at chapter 2, the day, on that day, at that time, the day of the anger of the Lord, the day of the anger. Gaza shall be deserted, Ashkelon shall become desolate. Woe to you, O nations of the Kerethites, Canaan, land of the Philistines, the sea coast, the houses of Ashkelon, the taunts of Moab, the revilings of the Ammonites. Moab shall become like Sodom, the Ammonites like Gomorrah. The remnants of my people shall plunder them. You Cushites, the Cushites are North Africans. Assyria is Mesopotamia, Nineveh particularly. And then judgment on Jerusalem itself in the first part of chapter 8, and then judgment on the nations. For the day when I rise up to seize the prey. This is verse 8. My decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, my burning anger, for in the fire of my jealousy, all the earth shall be consumed. Now, it could be read, all of the land shall be consumed, but let's say all of the earth. This is a picture of the gathering together of nations for one great final conflagration in the day of the Lord. In the book of Revelation, this is called the Battle of Armageddon. In the book of Ezekiel, it may be called the Battle of Gog and Magog. It is a battle of primarily of the nations which surround Jerusalem. A near circle and a far circle of nations. The far circle going as far away as Iran, as North Africa, Turkey is probably involved. The involvement of other nations farther away is harder to see in the prophetic scriptures. Some have included China in the battles of the end time. Some see a place for the United States in that battle. Personally, I don't see that. Some have seen Russia in the battle. I see the southern tier of Russian states, the old Muslim states, but I don't see Russia proper getting into this battle. I don't see most of the European states in prophecy. Some do, but I don't see them there. This looks like a battle that is primarily the usual suspects, the nations which have always hated Israel from the time of Ishmael to the present, and which are today Muslim. Following that 7-year time of Jacob's trouble, a 7-year time of judgment, at the end of that time, the Battle of Armageddon will climax the battle, and the Messiah himself returns. The restoration of Israel is focused on in the end of chapter 3. From 9 to 13, we see a picture of the conversion of the nations, which is really good news. I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord. In the context, this means that the usual suspects will have large numbers of converts. I'm not sure how that works, whether this is during the millennial kingdom or the end of the battle. I don't know, but there it is. And in verse 14, sing aloud, O daughter of Zion, shout, O Israel, rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem, for the Lord has taken away the judgments against you and has cleared away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You shall never again fear evil. On that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, fear not, O Zion, let not your hands grow weak. Okay, and it goes on. But the message there is the message of restoration for Israel, salvation for Israel, in the midst of judgment on the world, salvation for Israel in the day of the Lord. And so again, the common theme, a theme that we find all the way through the Old Testament, this is the theme of grace in the midst of wrath, of salvation in the midst of judgment. In the end time, judgment is coming, but in the midst of this huge judgment, salvation for the redeemed. And that includes us, of course. one way or another, and all the complexity. We will be in heaven watching most of this unfold. And the people of Israel in particular will be restored not only to their land where all of this will happen, but to a relationship of worship of their Lord. The restoration of Israel in the spiritual sense is the greatest of all the returns of Israel that we look forward to in the end time prophecy. The New Testament looks forward to that as well. Paul is looking forward to the second coming of Christ to fulfill the end times prophecies and to see again the restoration of the people of Israel. So that forms an outline of all of biblical prophecy. We're going to spend the rest of our time in Old Testament looking at prophecy, and I'm going to have to go fairly quickly through a whole bunch of prophecy. There's a whole bunch of it going on out there, and that will start on, what day is today? Today is Monday. So on Wednesday, we will continue this study in the Old Testament with some Jeremiah. I think we'll go right on into Jeremiah. Oops, yep. We'll go straight on into the book of Jeremiah. And I'm going to have to do it quickly, much as I hate it. There's only two ways to do Jeremiah. One is to do it quickly, and the other is to spend about 3 years going verse by verse. We won't try that. I could let Donna do it. She really likes Jeremiah. I like Jeremiah, but Isaiah is my favorite. So bye-bye, and we'll see you on Wednesday. God bless you all. Sleep well the rest of the night, those of you in the Philippines, and those of you in Israel, get a good night's rest now. I hope to see you again on Wednesday. Brother Oscar, bye-bye. Stick around for a couple of minutes, well, no. We'll do it by email. I'll fix you by email, and we'll go on from there. Pastor Joel, bye-bye to everyone in Italy.
Thank you so much, Dr. John.
God bless everybody. Don,
Bye, Dan. Bye.
you need to show. You need to send some pictures of that house under construction. Yeah, we got to do that. Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
That was good.